Hi there, my name is Nicole Scarlotto, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm a transgender woman who works in recruiting at Lyft. Now, when I began my transition, I lacked the support I needed. Joining Lyft gave me a safe space though, and in fact the day I joined Lyft was the day I started living as Nicole. And I can't even begin to say how important that was for me to have that safe space. And, you know, here at Lyft, we are committed to inclusion, and we are proud to celebrate the beautiful and very real spectrum of the LGBTQIA2S+ humanity. Our campaign, Two is Too Few, acknowledged that people should no longer have to define their gender by ticking one of only two boxes, and supported transgender and non-binary riders by becoming the first rideshare app in Canada to offer a range of optional pronouns. The purpose of today's Queer History Panel is to share the stories of influential queer and trans folk in Vancouver. Panelists will discuss their experiences so a new generation can pass it along and ensure queer history is not lost. We hope today's discussion will inspire everyone to keep striving for equity and justice so no one is left behind. Thank you.
Hi, and welcome to the Vancouver Queer History Panel. My name is Charmaine de Silva. I use the pronouns she, her, hers, and I'm so honored to be the moderator for today's event. In my day job, I'm the news director at News 1130. That means I've spent my career hearing people's stories and sharing them. I'm so excited to be able to dig a little bit deeper into Vancouver's important queer history. I'm also the former co-chair of the Vancouver Pride Society, so I've had the privilege of having a front seat to some of our more recent queer history. So let's get started. So we're really lucky to have put together an incredible panel, and I'm really excited just to dig in and get to know each and every one of you. So to start things off, let's go one by one and introduce ourselves a little bit. To start, Jen Sungshine uses the pronouns she, her, hers. Jen speaks for a living, but breathes life for breathing art into spaces, places, and cases. She is a queer Taiwanese interdisciplinary artist and activist, a facilitator, and community mentor based in Vancouver. Welcome, Jen.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Anything else you want to share with our audience a little bit about who you are and what you bring to this conversation?
Yeah, I'm also the co-artistic director of Love Intersections, which is a media arts organization that produces intergenerational and intersectional documentary film that centers the stories of BIPOC, so Black, Indigenous, people of color stories who identify as queer, two-spirit, trans, non-binary. And the kind of philosophy or the ethos that really grounds my artistic practice is rooted in relationship building and collaborative filmmaking. So yeah, that's kind of what I do in a nutshell.
Thanks, Jen. Angus Praught uses the pronouns he, him, his, and is an openly gay, Vancouver-based business person and co-owner of gayvan.com, travel marketing. Praught has been promoting Canada, Vancouver, and Vancouver Pride to the international LGBTQ2+ travel segment for over 25 years around the globe. Angus, welcome to the panel.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us a little bit more about you.
As my bio said, my background's in tourism, and about 25 years ago, I started getting involved in the international LGBT travel market, which took me around the world and gave me a chance to promote Canada and Vancouver Pride and Vancouver in general to the international LGBT travel segment. I also am involved with Outlook TV as a reporter and work in the film industry as well.
Great, thanks for coming, Angus.
Thanks for having me.
Yogi Omar uses the pronouns he, him, his, and is originally from Indonesia. Yogi has been living in Vancouver for 19 years, more than half of his life, and has always lived in East Vancouver. He is just leaving his position as co-owner of Inspirational Talent, a Vancouver-based talent agency that focuses on representing POC talents, and now he's looking to pursue a career in the nonprofit world. He's also vice president of the Vancouver Men's Chorus. Welcome to the panel, Yogi.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Tell us a little bit more about you.
I guess just a little bit about like what I'm doing right now. It's just 2020 for me is a year of clarity. I've gotten to do everything that I wanted to do. I got my laser eye surgery, I got a puppy, I lost 25 pounds. So aside from the financial stress, which is very real, everything else has been a big check mark in my life. So this has just been another one of those things that I feel that I have way more clarity this year.
This is the year of Yogi.
Oh, well.
Thanks for coming, Yogi.
Thank you.
Kona uses the pronouns she and they, and arrived in Vancouver in 1997, became actively involved in the queer community shortly after, organizing the X-Dress Social Club for approximately 3 years, and ran the only women's bathhouse in Canada for almost a decade, Canadian Mayhem for 5 years, and the DS Discussion Salon for 6. So Kona, welcome to the panel. Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
I have, as you said, I've been here since 1997 and have been the only Black out publicly attending leather dyke in the local scene during that time. No one else has been there regularly, and as a consequence, I went into my own piece of activism, which I don't consider activism. I consider myself a highly engaged citizen. And so I've done a number of other projects over the years, specifically aimed at convening queers. So I did a project a few years ago with Extra West and The Junction, where we convened a panel over four panels looking at the notion of what is queer. It was an intergenerational, interracial conversation. I also do something recently with my niece called Black Chat Vancouver, which centers Black queer voices in a conversation, sort of home style gatherings, going out into the community, into arts and cultural organizations to sort of change the complexion of the audiences. And then most recently this past December, she talked me into starting a podcast so that people who couldn't be present in my home or do those gatherings, which are exclusively for Black people, could have more access to the kinds of conversations that we were doing in that space. A number of years ago, I also did a project called the Queriotic Table, which toured to a number of local festivals, but also toured internationally. And it was a project that took the periodic table, queered it with language, and then invited people to sort of explore what molecule they were, how they moved in the world, and the kind of language that they use. And that's having its 20th anniversary, or its 10th anniversary coming up. There's other things that I do as well, but I mean, it's a long list.
It's hard to boil down your entire life and what you do into a few moments, but thank you for doing that for us, Kona. Shawn Ewing uses the pronouns she, her, hers, and is the former president of the Surrey Pride Society and the Vancouver Pride Society. Shawn received the 2013 Red Life Lifetime Achievement during the Vancouver Pride's Legacy Awards. And during her time with the Vancouver Pride Society, Shawn worked tirelessly to help Pride relieve their debt and continue to put on a parade. And in 2016, helped organize the first Pride Parade in Surrey. Welcome to the panel, Shawn.
Thanks, Charmaine.
Tell us a little bit more about you.
I'm active in doing Pride stuff as far as the parade is concerned. I'm kind of a parade geek, but I've mostly retired from any kind of active life in the community. I live out in Surrey. I sing with the social justice choir, and I work with a program that provides employment or looks for employment for marginalized youth. So I work with them.
Well, we're happy to have you on the panel, and thank you, all of you, for taking your time, giving us some of your time, and being willing to share your perspective and your stories. We're going to get right into the conversation, and I think, you know, when a lot of us talk about our queer existences, one of the stories that often get asked and people often share are their coming out stories. So I'm curious about what it has been like for some of you to come out in Vancouver and be in Vancouver during that process. Is there anyone who wants to kick things off and share their story?
I will.
Shawn.
When I was much younger, about 12 years of age, I was in an organization that's a fraternal organization for girls. And one night they had a group come in that was being initiated. And there was this girl in this group that was being initiated, and no, I was 13, she was 12. And there was something. There was something there. We couldn't quite figure it out. We became special friends that had some intimate moments with it. We went to discover if we were, we'd heard about the gay thing, lesbians, but really weren't sure. We thought we were just special friends. So we went to a bar in Vancouver called the Quadra Club. It was our first experience. We came from North Vancouver, all polyester pressed, looking fine in our white shirts and beige pants and all ready to dance the night away. We walk up the stairs to the Quadra. There's a big black cat that says restricted. We know we're in the right place. We're going to find out if we are lesbians. We open the doors. It's a black-lit room with a bunch of tables with beer bottles with candles stuck in them with that red terry towel I've been around the bar forever covering on it. The washroom didn't have a door. The bar was a couple of coolers. The DJ was up on a raised stage on a table that had one of those record players where you take the top off, it becomes the speaker, so you can't dance really too close to the table. And we looked around the room, and I thought, there's a lot of leather in this room. There's a lot of really short hair. There's a lot of very tough-looking women. We got our beer. We sat at the table. I think we even had a dance. When it got to the point where we had to go to the washroom, that was when we said, gotta go now, and left, and walked out of the bar and said, okay, so we're not gay, we must be just special friends. Moving forward on all of that story is that 12-year-old young girl is now my wife of 13 years. Wow. So coming out was difficult at that time, and society was not ready for it. We kept it very well hidden. We went to high school together. We double dated so we could be together. We found out the names of all the straight bars, so when people said, where did you go last night, we could say the name of the straight bar. When I was finally outed to my family, I never had the opportunity to tell them, but when I was finally outed, my father felt the need to call a family conclave. I was working for him at the time, and he felt the need to say that this was not the place for me to be working. So it was all kind of, not great. And moving past that, I can't imagine that life anymore. But it took a lot to get to it, and to be able to stand up and to be able to walk out wearing ridiculously covered whatever, or to just stand up and say, I am a proud lesbian. It's been an enjoyable journey, though.
Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for going on that journey and being here today. That's just absolutely incredible. Does anyone else want to share their story? Yeah.
I actually came out in Vancouver. It was October 2001. I was just moving here in September. Actually, I moved here at the end of August, so it is my early days in my Vancouver days. I have my chosen family that I live with, and when I first came out to them, I didn't even know it was sometimes around mid-October. Years later, I found out it's around the time of National Coming Out Day. I was like, the universe works in mysterious ways. But when I first came out to them, the first thing they said was, we're going somewhere. I'm like, where are we going? We went to Little Sisters, and they got me a book. And and they're my family, so they're lovely. And then on my 19th birthday, that February, they took me to the Odyssey, and that was my first gay bar experience ever. And I met my first boyfriend on that dance floor that night. So for me, Vancouver has been amazing in terms of my coming out experience, which is a far cry from my biological family experience of coming out, because they're still, to this day, 19 years later, still having problems with coming to terms with me being gay, which is fine. That's their choice, and I have chosen to move away, and I have my chosen family and my life here that I value and cherish and absolutely love. But the coming out experience was incredibly amazing. It's like my love letter to Vancouver.
Now, you came here from Indonesia. So, you know, you're bringing that part of you with you when you come here.
Yeah.
What would it, is that even an option in Indonesia today to come out?
No. Indonesia is still today is still a terrible place to be an openly gay person. And I do carry a lot of that in me as well. And I think that I have come to terms with, like, I am a Canadian now. I have had a lot of past trauma and experiences that I had to deal with and tackle and really overcome in order to experience a full, like, a self-love that I'm worth it, that I am here because I'm meant to be here, and I'm here then, and I'm making a difference in the world that I live in now.
Thank you. Thank you, Yogi. Angus.
Okay, I'd like to talk a little bit about coming out professionally in Vancouver. And I came out many, many years ago personally as an individual, but in the professional tourism industry, there weren't many gay people out and about in the 1980s. And so my partner and I, he's my husband now of 34 years, who I met in Tokyo, we would attend tourism events as a couple, but not wearing it on our sleeve. We would just go. And people kind of got used to us a little bit. And we were in the hotel business, the sales and marketing industry. And in 1998, we became partners in a gay hotel and bar, the Royal on Granville Street. And that really sort of opened us up to the tourism industry as being gay. And we marketed the hotel as a gay hotel that was straight friendly back in 1998. And so people didn't really know what gay travel was about. So part of our coming out was educating the industry and working with the tourism organizations and working with hotels and restaurants and letting them know that there is a big travel market out there, and that if they wanted to work with us, that we could all expand that and promote Vancouver internationally.
Well, in 2020, you know, we know that the LGBTQ2+ community is a top target for the tourism industry and the travel industry and all of that sort of thing. What obstacles? I imagine that certainly wasn't an easy process being in that industry in that time.
Well, yeah, especially having been in the mainstream industry as a senior manager in a hotel and things like that, and people are saying, what is this gay travel thing you're talking about? And so it was basically, we did workshops, and people came and they were very interested. People were curious, but they didn't know what it was. And then we told them, well, there's people all over the world who are gay who like to travel. And so we sort of educated them and brought people in, brought in speakers, showed them examples, went to events. And eventually people started to get interested, and now it's a big part of the industry, as you said. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you for that work. It's so important.
Thank you.
Does anyone else want to share their coming out story? I'm curious if any of you have a story connected to Pride and the way that sort of Pride connected with that part of your story in Vancouver. Kona, I can see something happening here. Is it, when you think of Pride and Vancouver, do you have an experience that?
I guess what comes up for me is when I think of Pride, I think of how when I arrived in '97. Shortly after, I found myself working for the BC Human Rights Commission with, you know, the fabulous, amazing, excellent Mary Wu Sims at the helm at the time. And it was there that, you know, coming from Edmonton, where I was highly engaged in theater, raised by drag queens is what I tend to say, because there were lots and lots of drag queens that were involved in Edmonton theater, and sort of that became my chosen family. And then when I came to Vancouver, I was really sort of looking to see whether there was the ability to connect with something like that was familiar. And I remember going to Little Sisters, so I arrived in May, and I remember finally making my way to Little Sisters, and I mean, I did the classic. I mean, I'm embarrassed now. You know, the little earring with all the little rainbow-colored rings and pins, and I was so excited to not be at home and able to let that fly. And through the sort of people that I started to meet that were queer, connected into the leather dyke scene. And so that became my anchor point for my queerness here in Vancouver, and in many ways continues as a really core piece of my identity. I mean, you can see that I've got, I'm head to toe here representing. And one of the things two things that we did in those early years, one was that there was this tree towards the end of the parade route that we called Dyke Tree. And we would, at the end of the parade, there would be 40 of us sitting under this tree at the end of the parade route, eating, laughing, drinking, playing music. So I think of that as a big chunk of my pride. And then the other thing that we did probably about 10 or 12 years ago, I'd have to think about it, myself and a couple of other people, myself and people whose names I don't have the permission to say here, created the Leather Dyke Picnic, which now is the Leather Queer Picnic and happens on the Monday of Pride, which is the sort of cool down at Trout Lake. And again, there's a dyke tree that we sit under. We hang a flag. Last year it was actually in one of the gazebos, but barbecues get going, and last year there was 70 people. Like, it just has grown and grown and grown and grown over the years of people that throw down a blanket and just hang out. So when I think about Pride, I think about it very much that way. I also think about how my early experiences with Pride really had sort of white gay male culture influences or underpinnings or focus. And so over the years, I did more efforts to not go to those things, but instead to go to East Van Pride and to go to the Dyke March and those kinds of things where I felt I could be more 100% of who I was. So one of my experiences of Pride is this tension of feeling like I could be present in the way that I wanted to be, which does include being a leather dyke and has, there's complications there. And then, there's lots of fond memories that go through my head, right? Like organizing parties specifically around Pride for leather queers and lots of memories, lots and lots of memories, lots of thoughts.
Well, you mentioned this. Now, this is a more than a 20-year history in Vancouver, watching this progress, and you mentioned, this idea of Pride being very sort of cis, white, gay male. Have you seen any progress or change in that over the years, or is that still what you identify with Pride in 2020?
Wow, that's like really complicated. That is almost a bourbon conversation.
A mini bourbon conversation, a bourbon sniff. Are you able to give us a sniff, maybe?
So I guess what I would say is that over 20 years, I've seen more. And I think it really, for me, I observed it in the young people that were coming up, where they just weren't having the old paradigms. They wanted to reshape the language. They wanted to blow up and explore the kinds of activities that were occurring, and really a push towards a type of agency, representation, and visibility that has just been increasing and increasing and increasing. And as that's happened over the 20 years, and currently right now with this moment of global uprising around racial justice that's anchored in the Black Lives Matter movement, I'm really seeing how there's really clear distinctions between an older generation, more cis white male, and the influence and shaping that they have had around Pride, and people of color, and Black, Indigenous, and other people of color really asserting their right to be in the space and to be in spaces on their own terms. So we see that right across Canada with groups of people organizing, using their voices, being active, organizing parties, not showing up at certain places, and being really clear that they're not taking it anymore. I think that would be the bourbon snifter short, too long, didn't read version.
It's important. And Jen, I saw you nodding a little bit while Kona was speaking there. So perhaps you can share a little bit about what you're thinking about and what you've observed with Pride.
Yeah, thank you. I really resonated, I think, with what Kona was sharing as it relates to the evolvement of language and how younger generations have and are embodying a kind of gender and sexuality that is so fluid and vast and I remember myself too evolving and growing my own identity as a queer person. I started with I'm a lesbian, and then I was I'm a dyke, and very politicized, and really felt that deep in my body and in my bones. And then I was well, I'm gay, and then I've just kind of landed at queer. It's just so much more free, I think. And I used to do out in schools presentations, and I saw firsthand in school presentations, and this is all within the span of 6 years between 2010 to 2015, this extreme and drastic shift in perception in how young people take up language. Maybe at the beginning, 2010 era, when we say gay in presentations, the young people would still have a gasp, right? Such a taboo word. But towards kind of the end of my run doing, school presentations, I saw that queer was cool and is cool, and that in fact, if you're not fluid and queer and non-binary, then you're kind of boring and not as exciting and cool. So there's a real interesting shift in how young people are taking up these terms and embodying them. There's just this ease, I would say. And obviously we know that we can attribute this ease, this sense of ease and comfort to the work that our elders have paved the way for us, and that we're still continuing to make the world safer and easier. That's kind of where I reside.
Now, Angus, I assume you have been to a few Pride parades, probably. But when
yes.
you think about Pride, what has that experience been for you throughout the years?
Coincidentally, our Pride experience started by chance in Vancouver. We came here to visit in 1980, I think it was, and we were down by English Bay, and suddenly we heard this noise, and we saw some shopping carts coming down the street, and some people with banners and placards down by Alexander Park. And I think it might have been one of the very first Pride parades. And we said, what is this all about? And so that was very exciting. And so when we actually finally moved to Vancouver, Pride was something we attended every year. But through our professional tourism contacts, we were out doing Prides all over the world. We did Prides in Europe and Australia and New Zealand and all the major cities in the US, New York, Chicago, LA, San Francisco, San Diego. And so each year we do about 10 Prides. So our Pride experience sort of really evolved over the years, and it's become a big part of our life. And it sort of shaped our own business as well around that.
Yeah, Yogi.
Just in terms of Pride experience, I think my first experience with Pride was very lonely because I was by myself. I was still exploring myself and my identity and everything. And even the first time I came down to Davie Street, I didn't even know how to read street signs. So I got off I got off the bus on Granville and Davie, and I walked up to Howe, and then walked down to Helmkin, and then get back to Granville, and then that was it. That was all my 4 squares, 5 times. And I was like, is this what Gay Village is? Oh my God. And then, yeah, so finally, and then I went to Pride for the first time ever in 2002 by myself because I was scared. I was scared. I was still at the in the church at the time, and I was in the middle of potentially getting kicked out from the church. And then I was like, okay, well, I need to find a place that I feel safe. So I went down there by myself, and then I look at all the people and all the groups and everything, and then the 2 groups that really stood out for me was the P flag, because they have the I love my gay son sign, and then I cried and I cried and I cried. And then I saw the Vancouver Men's Chorus, and I was like, that's it. That's where I want to belong. And that was in 2002, my first year. And then like fast forward to 2016, and it was, for me, it was the most personally heavy but also amazing year for Pride, because that Pride was a week before I became a Canadian citizen, and I was marching with the Prime Minister. And I woke up with a very overwhelming feeling that morning, thinking like, not that long ago I went to Pride by myself, and now I'm marching with the leader of this country that is going to be my country. So it was amazing. It's an amazing feeling. So now I want to pass the baton, and then now, like hearing stories about younger people taking more space and everything. It's like, yes, I really wish that when I was younger, I have all these role models to like teach me and like educate me about all these things. And now, like, I'm becoming the elders, and hopefully I'm wise enough to help other young people to feel comfortable with themselves and have a very positive, meaningful Pride events and experiences in their lives.
Thank you. Now, Shawn, listening to these stories, I mean, you have been so involved with Pride, behind the scenes, attending Prides, working Prides, getting Prides off the ground. When you hear a story like Yogi's and that transformation, what's coming to mind for you?
I think that's one of the things. Every year that I've worked Pride, there's somebody that it's their first Pride. It's their first time to find out if this is who they are. Is there somebody else that looks like me, that is attracted to whatever you're attracted to? And so, I've seen that over the years. In the last couple of years, unfortunately, the Knights of Malta, who were traditionally the long-standing flag bearers for the parade, has disbanded. Most of the, lots of the fellows have passed on. And so, as a parade, we were faced with this, what are we going to do? And so we were organizing, helped organize the flags. And there was this young gentleman who had just arrived in Vancouver. He was part of the Rainbow Refugee. He arrived from Africa. His English was diddly squat. He's still very, very protected in his refugee status when he arrived here. And I spoke to a couple of the guys who were sponsoring him, and they said, they were talking about, this is going to be his first Pride parade he's ever seen, because he's still like, this is a microwave. This is where he's come from. He's come from a place that he didn't know what a microwave was. He didn't know about automatic washing machines. And he was going to have this opportunity to see this parade. And so we were able to say, hey, there's not many people that I give up my feather dusters to, but it would be really cool if he would start the parade. And so he did. He showed up with his sponsor group, and he had this bright. He was so excited. He was showing me his rainbow-colored socks. He was just so excited about this, and I handed him over my feather dusters, and I handed him a whistle, and he's like looking at this massive people that are sitting on Robson Street, and he blew the whistle and he flagged them going, and he was like, tears in his eyes. Last year, another woman who I've met from Angola who came here, arrived here and declared refugee, carried the pride flag. And that was the first time she could be out and be gay. You know, she had been beaten where she lived, and for even showing glimpse of being gay. And there she was carrying this pride flag, and all of these people were cheering. It was incredibly overwhelming. And that's, you know, those are the things that I think are just so amazing about what the parade has done. I mean, the parade has, absolutely, it's changed over the years. And Kona and I were talking about beginning part before when we were sitting here, where it was 18 years ago or 19 years ago when I first got involved, and what it has evolved to now, good and bad, you know, but sort of mindsets then and mindsets now have changed on some things. Certainly, some of it is language. You know, I struggle. I'm 61 years old, and I struggle with some of the language that's being used now. When I was younger, if somebody called me queer, that was not a positive thing in any way, shape, or form. It was, you know, usually something that happened before you were going to get broadsided or, you know, whatever. So it was more of an and so when I hear it now, I'm having difficulty accepting it as part of who I am because it was used as such a negative term before. Contents of the parade has changed. You know, we can get really controversial when we talk about, you know, when I was involved in the parade in 18 years ago, it was a really big thing across Canada if you had a police department marching in your parade. It was a huge thing. And I can remember a young RCMP officer standing in the Pride office, and he talked about how he has worked internally for 2 years to be able to get a small contingent to be able to be walking the parade. And this was just, it was huge for him. Talking to Roz Shakespeare, the first woman that was, she transitioned when she was in the police department. Cheryl, I don't remember her last name. But these people were very proud about the fact that their organization was standing up there and saying, we support our gay and lesbian, what appeared to be, you know, and this is what lots of it is, you know, and so it was like, this is a good thing, and it seemed to be well received, and then things changed. But I would say to Kona, I wish I knew then what I knew now. There didn't seem to be that kind of divisiveness, but there was not, for me certainly, and certainly for a lot of people, awareness about what was going on. We had, you know, we were running, right? We got gay rights. We got all these things going on, and we're all running together because we have all fought together. And, you know, and we're running, and all of a sudden I'm looking behind me, and there's some people that are still there. And the first recognition of that in Pride wasn't around Black Lives Matter, wasn't around people of color, was actually around transgender, when they forced the issue around the Thames Pledge. When they said, if you're going to be in this parade, you need to sign this document. And this document says, you know, we do not discriminate in any way, shape, or form against people that are transitioning, transition, whatever. And it was hugely controversial. But what it did do is it brought to front the fact that we had left some folks behind in this movement forward. And then, you know, more recently in the past, you know, past 4 years, I would say, really actively. You know, certainly it came to light with Toronto and that all stuff. And so there initially, and this is the really sad part, you know, 3 or 4 years ago when it first came to head, and it came to head in Vancouver, it was like the community exploded. There were so many bitter, angry, vicious things that were being said in person. On social media, it was just like hot. And there was some real, you know, some real good work that was initiated by the Pride Society, and I think that it must have been a very difficult position to be in. It was a hotbed, and we didn't know how to talk to each other. We didn't know how to have some serious conversations about what had gone on without using bad language, whatever, I guess. I think that more particularly in the last 3 years, there's been more of an opportunity. I think it was 3 years ago, and Kona, I'm sorry if I'm wrong, 3 or 4 years. But what happened is it started to create the awareness, just like the TENS Pledge, right? It started to create this awareness. So you became more aware of when somebody was talking about somebody that was, some black fellow that had been beaten up in the States. It wasn't the States anymore. It was part of this humanity thing. It created an awareness, and I think that's where we're at now. There's an awareness around this, and how do we deal with it? I think that I know for me, I stumble a whole lot, and I'm trying to learn. But I can truly say, honest to God, for the first time, if I were to be standing in front of the parade this year, I would be wearing a Black Lives Matter T-shirt. And for people that have been involved with me in that discussion for years beforehand, this has been a movement forward for me. So my connection to Pride has made me deal with this. It would have been really easy if I didn't have any other connections to sit in my blissful spot out in Surrey in the backyard and not be aware. So as sometimes brutal as it has been, it also brings awareness. And I think that in that awareness, we as a community, as a queer community, can be the leaders of that mindset for the rest of society. By embracing and learning and moving forward as a group of people, not as pink, green, orange, black, brown. We are a group of people moving forward, and we have people aren't going to agree with everything, but I think that we've got this opportunity.
Kona, I was watching you react to some of what Shawn was talking about, especially in this conversation of leaving folks behind, Pride leaving folks behind. The trans community, and then also black folks, people of color, Indigenous folks. Do you have sort of any thoughts on that process, watching it, being a black person in Vancouver, watching this conversation, and what impact it had on you?
Well, I've got all kinds of feelings. I have all kinds of thoughts. The first one that comes up is that the idea that people who are racialized have been in conflict with Pride for a long time. The fact that the Powell Street Festival and Pride happen on the same weekend, that situation comes out of racialization, and to this day, there are lots of queers for whom Powell Street Festival is their pride, and those are people of color that go there, that go to Powell Street Festival, because Pride moved there. Pride moved there, Shawn? They moved to the same weekend as what I remember.
Yeah, it was before my time, sorry.
Yeah, it was before mine too.
It used to be on the Monday, and then they moved it to the Sunday. That's what I do know.
And so there was this way in which people of color said, or racialized queers said, but we have this other thing going on. Why are you doing this? Why are you doubling down on what you need instead of what we need? So these conversations aren't new. And, and what you were saying about the way that trans folks have really come into a kind of awareness and being within the Pride societies, again, these conversations aren't new. I think I think what's different now is that people aren't having it anymore. As Jen was saying, young people aren't having it anymore. As somebody who's 50, I feel an obligation and a responsibility to acknowledge them as mentors and guides, and for me to use my position, my networks, my privileges, my resources to help manifest the dreams and visions that they have of the Pride queer world that they want. That's my job. And if I'm doubling and tripling down on how pride used to be this and pride used to be that, which is the conversation that's been happening for 5 years. This is our pride, you're yucking our yum, you're interfering with our good time. And in there, trans people are saying, wait a minute, we are part of the our. When you say we and don't include us, that others us and tells us that this is not for us. When people of color hear that, what we hear is that it's a really subtle but clear message. You people are interrupting our thing. And when that's a group of people of color, there's a clear message there that's very uncomfortable. But I see that shifting this year with the global uprising, compounded and exacerbated by the global pandemic. You know, some of those conversations, it's very interesting to me to see people in this moment that I was fighting with online and in person, and like white queer friends that I thought I had really solid connections with, loving, supportive, mutual-based relationships. When Black Lives Matter started making their moves across the country and across the world, I saw people who I thought were my friends saying things that I was like, you're not about me. Like, I was shocked, and many of my friendships with white queers were deeply, deeply impacted. You know, working that out over the years in some ways. Some people I'm just like, you are trash. Done. What is interesting to me now is, as Shawn has said, some of those people who were doubling and tripling down are now coming out and posting live and saying that they have shifted. I take a great deal of hope in that, and it makes me wonder, what is our new normal? And does Pride go back to being a protest, and in this case, a protest that is about human rights, that is about social justice for us all, and about people who have historically had a really good seat at the table and a really nice slice, you know, that corner piece of cake with all the icing, sharing. And it's going to take some seeding of power, position, place for that. I have to hold hope. Otherwise, I don't know what I'm going to do about my queer identity. Because I've worked so hard over the years, put so much of my personal time, money, energy into convening, organizing, participating in queer culture in this city. I don't want to remove myself from that collectivism, but not at the expense of me and my body and my sanity. And with that comes fear, anxiety, and mourning and grief, because the queer family that I thought was 5-6 years ago blew up. And I hold a piece of betrayal, but I also hold great hope, because these young people, they're not having it. And if we come along, great. And if we don't, well, we'll be dead soon anyway.
Angus, I saw you nodding quite a bit as Kona was speaking.
Yes, when you mentioned the Powell Street Festival, that hit home with us, as my partner's Japanese, and it was something that, you know, we'd like to go to as well. It's kind of like a celebration in its own right. And it happened to be at the same time as Pride, after a shift in dates and things like that. And so we found it really hard to try and do both. And something with my professional obligations and working with Pride and coverage of the parade, et cetera, we couldn't really do both. So we had to kind of choose, is it Pride or is it Powell Street Festival? So it's a shame that that happened. So that was what I was nodding about initially.
Now, the other part of the conversation, and I'm going to, and I apologize for this, but I'm going to put you on the spot as the only, you know, cis white male, gay male on this panel. You know, you've watched this conversation. You're seeing the conversation that's happening right now in our community around this. this topic about, who is Pride for? What have you been hearing, and have your own feelings on this topic evolved over the years?
Well, Pride is for everybody, and one of my things I've done the last few years is do live, co-hosting live coverage of the Pride Parade, and we would introduce all the different groups coming through the parade and seeing who was all part of it, and seeing the reaction of people to the various groups, like when the Share came through, the Share group came through, and people in the crowd were loving it, but there was still, in society, that wasn't the norm. It wasn't what you're seeing in the parade, wasn't what you were seeing in everyday life. So that's why I think Pride is so important, because we did have representation from lots of different people in the parade, and I think that affects society in general.
Now, Jen, Kona, when Kona finished off there, was talking about youth and young people aren't having it. And I know you've worked extensively with young people, but I'm also curious on your thoughts on this conversation and the evolution as a person of color as well. This conversation is still happening, and it has been happening for a long time, as Kona mentioned. It's not just 5 years old. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I feel like we've been having this conversation. It's a tired conversation because I've been having this conversation for as long as I can remember. And it's just like different iterations of the same thing. I think that a lot of it kind of comes down to that it's very easy for us to be trapped within the mindset of like single issues, and that in fact we are complex people and we live in like multiplicity, and we can reside in the tensions straddling different identities and things, and oftentimes under colonialism and this mentality, it pits us against one another, right? And so we are forced to compete with each other, compete who gets a piece and place at the table. And so for me, I'm now considered an older millennial, but I still consider myself part of the fight, if you will. But the way that I see young people, especially Gen Z, I gotta say, I forced myself to download TikTok just so I could like get in the consciousness of Gen Z, and I am such a fan. I'm obsessed with Gen Z. I think that they're so weird and quirky and incredible, and there's just this kind of like, just this incredible like resonance that they exude that I just am like really into, where I may police and censor myself in the presence of those who provide resources and support and money and all of those things that I need to survive. I see Gen Z as like, again, like what Kona said, like I'm not having it, they're not having it. And it's just such an exuberant way of living. And I'm like, wow, okay, actually this is great, because we sure did something right if this is what's being presented here. I think that the tension and the conversation around like race, if we're going to be very explicit in calling that and naming that, I think it's important around like naming race and sexuality, right? Like that intersection is super fascinating as well for me, because I remember I was sitting on the Vancouver School Board's Pride Advisory Committee, and this would have been like 2013, 2014. And we were updating this like 10-year-old policy to make schools safer for transgender students, which included like, neutral bathrooms. Sorry, I'll be louder. And that, what I noticed, so the update to the policy was highly controversial. I don't know if folks remember. It was heavily protested. And I'm very careful in naming who were protesting this policy update, right? Because they were conservative, right-wing Chinese Christian parents. And I remember sitting in those, in the school board meeting in the room where, there's so many people that signed up to speak either for or against this policy update. And I remember sitting with my so-called community behind me, with our rainbow placards and rainbow everything. And sitting directly across from me were people that looked like me, that could like be my parents ostensibly. And the way that I noticed and observed the predominantly white mainstream media, how they represented and talked about and wrote about this controversy was really racist, right? Like, we have a serious problem within the LGBTQ2S community in the sense that there is still racism, right, that's happening. I remember one evening after a meeting, we were just getting, a bite to eat, and this older white lesbian kind of turned to me and was like, so what is it about your culture that is more homophobic? And I think that there's still this narrative that is present in the community, in terms of like painting, let's say, Chinese people as a monolith, right? We don't paint, folks from the Bible Belt like lamely, and that's like not all white people, right? But we paint Chinese people in this way, in this kind of like monolithic, we have a problem with like race and or gender and sexuality, right? And it's so different from my own coming out and upbringing. My parents are Buddhist and they're Taiwanese, and when I came out to them, it was a non-issue. So I have a very complicated relationship with, what does it mean to be proud? Because it is constantly evolving and in flux, and I'm constantly checking in with a sense of pride. Where are we at in relation to current events? How are we observing the external world that we're currently in? And kind of meet that and match that with that sense of pride. Does it still feel, and do I still feel like they are in tune with one another? Like, is it like the ethics in my own personal ethics, all of those things? I'm constantly checking my pride. So that's kind of where I'm at currently.
Now, Yogi, you are so active on social media as well. I think everybody is here, but I've watched you sort of speak out on a number of issues around injustice and around pride and other things. As you're hearing this conversation that we're having here today, what are you thinking?
I'm grateful, first of all, of like every single person here, because I'm learning every single time. And every time you say something, I take it in. It's right now, I think it's the perfect time for me to really learn and listen and really take my own space when I can, because I don't have that sense of privilege that are like, oh yeah, this is my space. And it's interesting because when you say that, like, oh, you're very active in social media, I don't consider myself that. And I took like a long time break from it too, but since I got back from it this year, I switched my way of thinking in terms of using social media as a platform to really elevate voices that needs to be heard, that needs to be spread out there. So like, I'm a lot more conscious about that, and also I'm a lot more conscious about my own internal racism that I could potentially have as well, because coming here from a different place, like, there are a lot of different baggages out there as well that, like, shape me. And now I'm kind of breaking it all down. So that's why now during like COVID time is the perfect time. I can study this. I can really, really get to the roots of my own identity and what is important. And that's when I'm going to like push out there. So when Jen was talking about all the different things, and like, especially what really was like, sitting across from people who looks like you, that, it's hard. Because I got called out by somebody who was like, but you're not really Asian though, you're kind of whitewashed. And it's really difficult because I'm like, sure, I listen to folk music with a lot of like, bluegrass and Americana, so like whenever I go to those concerts, I'm one of the only non-white people in that concert. Sure. And in that way, if you think of it that way. But at the same time, no, like I still have my experiences. I experienced riot in 1998 in Indonesia, where I had to, like, my entire family had to fly away and like hide from people trying to murder Chinese Indonesians. And like right now with all this riot that's happening, it brought back so many things that I thought I already dealt with. And so now I'm like, okay, am I sharing that on social media? No, because it's not my time and it's not my place, but I'm dealing with it and I'm listening to other people talk. And I feel like people who are not really familiar with this particular subject and who have not had long conversations that a lot of us here have, this is your time to really listen, to really educate yourself, to really, okay, where is my place in there and how can I be useful for the betterment of the future?
I think it's really interesting that, Pride started as a protest, and then as queer people, sorry, Shawn, as queer people became more accepted by mainstream society, that it became more and more of a celebration. I remember when gay marriage came to Canada, like celebration, 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 which is awesome, because we got to party when we're working hard, because there's been, in 20 years, I've seen so much amazing progress, change, shift, ease for queer people. And it's interesting to me that we have, over the last few years, and particularly this year, people out on the streets again. And once again, it's really moving towards this sense of collective survival. I think about some of the marches that happened around AIDS and people getting access to drugs, and how people were on the streets as queers because their lives depended on it. So there's a piece of me that feels like we've had 10 years of celebration, or several years of a couple decades of celebrating like all the good stuff that we have, and then we had a bit of a hangover, and it's like, okay, whew, time to work again. And that's kind of the trajectory that I sort of feel like I've seen over time. Now that some of us can be in our jobs and out, we can adopt children, we can do artificial insemination, all the things that queer people can do to be out in North America. Now we're sort of returning back to those roots of what do we as queer people need to survive? And in this moment, it looks different than it did historically. And I really look forward to us continuing to take up that mantle and to really seizing that and running with it. I'm really, the piece of me that's excited about the future is excited about possibility. To quote Octavia Butler, God is change. Everything you touch changes you. And we can affect. God is, change is malleable. And young people, we can support them. They're guiding us towards this new future. Like if I die tomorrow, I feel like we're in good hands. They got this. I'm so proud. They're smarter at 20 than I was at 35. Like it's amazing. So I think about queer culture and the ways in which its constituency is getting coming more and more into focus on the details. Like it's not just a pullback to say, oh, this wonderful thing. It's like a zoom in to what creates the mosaic. And I'm proud to have been a part of history, and I'm really looking forward to participating and being an ancestor worth remembering and helping to move towards the future and participating in that future. Like, I'm down for it.
And also, we change.
Yes.
And we evolve. And like, I remember my 20s were like, Pride in my 20s were like celebrities, Junction, Odyssey, in a party. And then Pride in my 30s were like this fundraising event, and then Dr. Peters and all these different things. And I'm really looking forward getting into my 40s to like Pride weekend would be marches and protests and marches. I'm really looking forward to that.
Now, part of that conversation Kona, when you were telling the story, is you highlighted some stuff that we don't often talk about when we're talking about this movement in history, and that's just our everyday lives. You mentioned, things from adoption and having families and kids, and so I'm and working and coming out and work, and obviously, it's one thing around policy and parade, but we're all also people living our individual lives in a society that has changed over time. So I do, as we near the end of this conversation, want to dedicate a little bit of time to some thoughts on that in your personal life, you know, and you just being you, some of the changes you've experienced. You know, I was thinking about the fact that I met my partner online, and that is not something that, you know, folks did. It didn't exist. So I'm curious from all of you about some of the changes that have happened in the past. Like Shawn, you know, you talked about that first club and bar experience, but how did folks meet each other?
That was it. I mean, and you know,
Oh, Kona's calling you out.
Remember
Charlie's, you
Remember
know,
Charlie's?
Yep.
Charlie's was
Charlie's Talk the Town. You know, Fridays was slumming it at the Lotus, because you go downstairs into the Lotus and you wore your jeans. Saturday was Talk the Town, and that's above ground, and so you were wearing a little bit better kind of outfits. How does it change? You know, it's, for me personally, you know, moving into that sort of forward thing, I never thought, you know, I lived in under the stairs of a friend's place on Commercial Drive, Meg's place. I never thought that I could ever get to a point where I would even consider owning anything, and I wouldn't live anywhere there wasn't like the gay zone. And so when I first moved out to Surrey, we got a place out in Surrey on a little cul-de-sac, and I'm waiting. I'm waiting for the people to come. It was in December time, and I'm waiting for people to come, and I'm preparing all of my, you know, my arguments. And so spring comes, I'm out mowing the lawn, I'm pushing my mower, and I see the old guy from the corner house, and he's making a beeline for me, and I think, here it comes. All right, I'm fluffing, shoulders are back. I'm thinking, I'm not going to turn this thing off until he's right beside me, because I'm just going to just ignore the son of a gun. And so I turn off the mower, he's standing there, and he said, yeah, so your lawn is south-facing, it'll burn. So you and your partner need to leave the grass longer. I'm Joe. Have a good day. That was it. There was no calling out. And there hasn't been. You know, we've been there for 10 years, and I have not been called out once there. I can't tell you the amount of times I got called out and trashed here. People are getting to, you know, I think that Surrey's a little bit different because it is so diverse. You know, nobody's going to throw a stone because they know the stone can come back at them just at any. So in that, there is a unity. You know, there's support. So Alex Sangha from Share Vancouver has garnished a lot of support within Surrey, which is has a strong South Asian community, which everybody has, you know, the idea of culturally, well, what are you doing? That's not how it is for the South Asian community, and he's doing this slow education that's going on that's really positive. That wouldn't have happened 20 years ago. I don't even know if 20 years ago you would have found a South Asian walking in the Pride Parade, because of the communities were very closed at that time. So I think that you know, for me, things have opened up and closed up sometimes. It's like I'm like everybody else. I'm excited about what's coming down the pike and how people are approaching things now. I think that it's important, you know, one of the questions you got, I think it's important that we remember our history too. And I think I'm the only one in the world that's, you know, is super proud of the fact that the 27th of June, Canada declared, it was written, it received royal assent that homosexuality was removed from the criminal code in Canada, along with abortion, therapeutic abortions. 2 days later is when Stonewall hit. So my thought pattern is that prior to that date for Canadians, there was a group of Canadians that had to do something. That had to do something to get them to motivate that you know, that they did this. Now, we know one of the people is Ted North, and you know, we have history with him, and you know, when it was passed, Trudeau phoned him and said, "Your Majesty," because he knew of Ted being sort of Empress of Canada. So I think it's really important that that's part of our history that I really hope that some of the younger people take a bit to and go, you know what, there were some people in Canada that made us here, and you know it wasn't just all white people. It was, you know, our Indigenous history, the Indigenous history of Two Spirits goes long before we even arrived here. So we need to recognize that. We need to recognize the players of that time, you know, and the players through our history that have got us to here, to a point where youth do have the ability, you know, to say, screw you. We're going to do it this way. We're going to push on. We're going to do this. A lot of that was groundwork that was cleared by people that, you know, need to be recognized. And this isn't in any kind of disrespect to the Stonewall movement and the Stonewall actions and all of the people that were involved around that, because it was very important. And like it seems to be everything, you know, when something happens in the States, now it's the biggest thing in the world. And so every 27th of June, I go, this is the day, Royal Ascent, 2 days before Stonewall happened. So I think that we need to take a little bit of pride in where we are and the people that we are, the city that we're in, the province that we're in. We've been pretty groundbreaking, but it hasn't been easy. There have been people that have stood on the steps of, that have laid their, you know, the bathhouse raids in Canada were Canada's protests. But there's nothing ever written about that, you know? Like, do you know Yogi?
No.
So I think it is really important to have that history to be able to move forward. Because if you don't recognize the history and the process of getting there, then moving forward, there's a chance, A, you might repeat the same mistakes, but there you miss something moving forward, the foundation that's there. And I think that that's one of the things that I can, you know, safely say about everybody that's here, is that they've been foundation makers in their bits and pieces of putting pride, and it's not Pride Weekend, it's not the flag, it's the feeling of putting pride out there for people to celebrate however. But it's still the same thing.
I do want to acknowledge, because you raised an important point about the role that the Indigenous community has had in this fight and the progress that has been made, and we were supposed to have that voice represented on this panel, but unfortunately that didn't end up happening today. But I'm confident that future conversations we will be able to do that, because it is so important, and that is, I think it's important to acknowledge that voice is missing from this conversation that we're having today.
Absolutely. The Greater Vancouver Native Cultural Society has done huge to educate the community, and you know what? They've always been there. Always been there. And they have been great leaders, both for the Indigenous community and the community at large.
Now, before we wrap things up, and we have to wrap things up, we could have this conversation forever, I know. And my phone is, my watch is buzzing, and it's my partner probably saying, like, where are you? But, you know, in a few words, we're going through an incredible moment in history right now, living through this global pandemic, this global uprising against racism in particular, anti-Black racism in particular. While we're having a conversation around Pride, while we're doing Pride differently, we're having to have virtual conversations and virtual celebrations and virtual activism. A few thoughts from each of you about the future. I'll start with Yogi.
I guess, other than the fact that I just miss physically seeing people, pride is within you, change is within you. This is the perfect time for everybody to really acknowledge that and really take your own space. So for me, I am very happy that we have this opportunity to really pause and learn. And I don't doubt that moving forward, Pride and being queer and our identity and everything will be celebrated again. But it's now the time for us to continue fighting. So I'm excited to be a part again in the LGBT movement, to be a bit more full-time in it.
Angus?
One thing I wanted to mention was the COVID crisis has affected our entertainment and bar venues very hard. They've shut down the bars on Davie Street. The drag queens are all out of work, and entertainers are out of work, and they're slowly starting to come back. And they were a core part of the gay community for many, many years. That's where we met and how we met. And I'm wondering, is the support for them going to be there moving forward? And is the community going to keep them going? And are they going to continue to be an important part of our community?
Drag queens in particular? Or
bars? The bars and the drag queens, because they work in the bars, a lot of them. And I think they were the core of the gay community for many, many years. And we're kind of losing that core. And what form is that going to take? Is the community going to come back and support the bars, support the drag queens, and continue having that as part of our core? Or is that going to change?
I think the idea of space is changing as well. So I think the more old-fashioned typical bar might not, be the same anymore. And things might be different in a year or two or whatnot after the vaccine and everything. There will always people going out. There will always going to be people wanting to be drag queens. There will always going to be that. So I think that we just need to support and find more creative ways to channel it in different ways, because now there are virtual channels, there are other things, and we don't know yet. Maybe it hasn't been created yet, but I don't doubt that they will still continue being, like one of the core members of our community, no doubt.
Really?
I think so.
Really?
Yeah. Entertainers and drag queens?
Well, bars. And,
Bars, okay.
Bars and the drag queens, because I think about Grindr, Scruff, Her, all those kinds of things. There's been a crisis across North America over the last 10 years of bars shutting down, spaces shutting down, not being, increasingly the revenue on a given night, that revenue coming from straight people who are out to hang out in the zoo, you know what I mean? And it's not when 20 years ago, it was like this, you'd go in and it was queer people,
right.
Gay and lesbian people. I go now and it's a venue for straight people to go I'm gonna be really daring on Saturday and me and my bridesmaids are gonna go to the bar. So I have the same kind of question as you. I don't know if it's the same. I don't know if they're going to survive in the same way. And now with COVID, I don't know, especially some of those venues are under such financial strain. Those physical spaces are. And then on top of that is the ways in which women, racialized people, transgendered people who have had trouble in those spaces historically because the complexion is very particular. I have questions as those people continue to rise into ascendancy. I think it's a really great question.
I think bar culture has to necessarily evolve and adapt as well bar culture has to necessarily evolve and adapt in order to adapt to the fact that drinking culture has also shifted and changed. Gen Z is not a drinking culture. I think it really is dying with millennials. I think there is an increasing more desire and interest in sober spaces where I just came across this tweet that I was like, I lost it last week because the Gen Z was it was dragging millennials, and I just loved it because nobody hates millennials more than we hate ourselves. Gen Z, one person tweeted, why do they think that being gay is a personality trait? And I was like, oh my gosh. It's so brilliant, and so I think that the how that reflects in what is a gathering space, I think it has to change as well, right? Yeah.
And Shawn, just to wrap things up.
I agree, and it's in Vancouver, and I can't talk about any other city, but in Vancouver, it was the bars that financed Pride for the longest time. Gary Penny and Terry Wallace. They would go into the tills of their establishments and pull out money to run Pride, and so they were a strong. They helped start us. They helped run that organization, and it has lessened over the years. The reality is that I agree with you. I don't think it's just the Gen Z folks. I think it's also some folks that are getting onto an age where I couldn't go to a bar and function tomorrow.
You've got to find childcare.
You've got to find childcare. There's a cost to it, and everybody knows what the cost of living is right now. So to go out and lay down, I don't know what's a pint of beer.
$6.
$6. So $6.
What?
Holy
Really?
crap!
10. Yeah.
10. So
Where are you drinking?
Yeah, I know.
Pump jack. Angus
So-
is giving an ad
So
for the
for
pump jack.
for disposable income, there's far less of it than it was, and I think you're right. They're not choosing to go to the bar space. They're fine through their savvy with social media and stuff. They're able to connect and be in each other's back pockets faster than you could go and order a drink at the bar. So I unfortunately, because I said, the history is there. They were the root and foundation of how we were able to finance for the longest times and have been ongoing supporters. So it's difficult. It's difficult for the performers too, because now where do you find a venue to perform?
Yeah. Dufferin's gone.
Streets.
The home of the native court.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank each and every one of you for taking the time to be here and share your thoughts and your perspective. It's an important conversation, and we are just scratching the surface. This is not even enough time or space to have this conversation and go as deep as we need to go. But I'm hopeful and optimistic we will have more opportunities to continue this on in the future. And thank you to all of you who have joined us for this conversation as we explore Vancouver's queer history as part of Vancouver Pride 2020. Thank you for joining us.